Okay, let's jump into today's stuff. So on number 1, we have 4 terms here. X squared plus 2x minus xy minus 2y. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this into 2 groups of 2. I'm going to analyze this, turn it into a GCF problem. Analyze the second group, turn that into a GCF problem. And when you factor by grouping, there is a checkpoint to let you know you're always on the right track. So let's take a look at this first group. What can I take out of x squared plus 2x? Just an x, that's right. So when I take out an x, that's going to be x plus 2. Good. And then what about the next 2 terms? What do they both share? A negative y. And I like how you said negative also, because when we factor out a negative, then that first term turns positive and that second term turns positive. Now they match. Here's my checkpoint right here. Remember, if you get a matching set in parentheses, then you are on the right track. You should feel very confident that you are factoring correctly. So those are my factors. Before I box them in, I'm just going to glance to see if I can keep going. I can't. So I am going to box it in. If we're going to be done with number 1, then we're going to take a look at number 2. All right. So before we jump into the next one, does number 2 have like B's for variables? Is that number 2? Is there B's? Okay. That's what I thought. So before we talk about that, remember, guys, when you factor, you are reversing some property that starts with letter D. What are you reversing? Yes, distributive. And if you are reversing that, then you are doing the opposite operation. So when you distribute, do you add, subtract, multiply, or divide? You multiply. So when we factor, what's the opposite of multiplication? Yeah. So this is multiply, but we're not really worried about multiplying. This is what we're working on. And when you factor, you really kind of divide. You do divide, there's no kind of. So with that being said, let's review distributive property. Let's say we had b squared times b to the 3rd plus 1. And you don't write any of this down. I'll do all the work. You just watch. Well, you kind of tell me what's going on. It would be b to what power? B to the 5. That's right. And then, of course, the other one would be what? Yeah. So when you multiply exponents, you add the exponents, right? So if I reverse this, you divide. And when you divide, you subtract. So what is 5 minus 2? 3. So that's b to the 3rd. What's 2 minus 2? 0. Y'all, what's anything to the 0 power? That's right. That's why there was the 1 there. So when you look at this problem, we are going to factor out a b to the m minus 1. And we're going to have to figure out what goes in its place. But I'm kind of jumping the gun here because out of all 4 of these terms, there's a GCF. What's the GCF for number 2?
3.
Yeah, so let's just take out the 3. So we're going to end up with b to the m plus 2 minus 2b m plus 1 minus 3b plus 6. Okay, and I'm still going to break them up into groups. My first group is going to be these first 2 guys right here. My second group is just the last two terms. Okay, so let's factor. Let's divide. I can take a b to the n plus 1 out of both of those terms. I know that the last term is just -2 because I took the whole b out. What is the b the first term gonna be? What kind of exponent is b gonna have? It is just 1. How do you know that?
Because you're taking out the n and 1 belongs from the 2, so all this left is a 1.
So remember, b to the n plus 2, n plus 2 is like n plus 1 plus 1. And if I'm taking n plus 1 out, then it is just going to be b to the first power. That's one way to think of it. You remember, you can always subtract. So it could also be like this. Remember, we're dividing. We had b to the n plus 2. We're dividing it by b to the n plus 1. And remember, what do we do with these exponents? We subtract them. So it would be n plus 2 minus n plus 1. And then when we distribute this negative, n plus 2 minus n minus 1, notice the n's cancel out completely. 2 minus 1 is just 1. So yes, we've confirmed twice that that first piece of that binomial is just the letter b. All right, next two terms. Next two terms are pretty easy. We're going to take a 3 out. Should that 3 be positive or negative? Totally negative. Yes, yes. So that's going to be a positive b minus a 2. Our parentheses match. We're feeling pretty confident. So our first term is b to the n plus 1 minus 3. Our last term is b minus 2. Can I take any of those farther? Can I factor the first term? No. 3's prime. Not a cube, not a square. That's all we can do. So we're ready to box that in.
The 3 that you factored out.
Oh, that is so correct. I forgot about my GCF of 3, and that certainly is going to go there. Okay, so let's take a look at the next one. Do I have a GCF on number 3? No. So let's just break them into two groups. The first two terms look good together. The last two terms look good together. So let's go ahead and do our GCF thing. So out of the first two terms, what's the most that I can take out? A 3 and a y. Good job. What's that going to leave? X plus what? Yes, very good. Remember, when you take all of a term out, the 1 is going to be the number that remains. What's going on with these last two terms? What did you guys take out of that? Yes. And that is going to leave x plus 1. Looking good. So our final answer is just going to be 3y plus 2a, x plus 1. Any questions on that? Okay, So this should have been a color slide. This is not in your packet, but it's very important. Please remember, not only do we have to factor everything out completely, sometimes you'll have to factor more than once. You guys need to try to make sure all of your letters are positive. Sometimes you can't help it, and I'll show you an example. But on number 4 and number 5, we have our work cut out for us. And we are not having a speed test today. Don't worry about that. Okay, so all of our variables, we really want them to try to be positive. Let's look at number 4. So for number 4, I'm fine with the way it's grouped. For the first 2 terms, what can we take out?
A squared.
Okay. So that's going to leave 2 minus b. Yes? We agree? Okay. And then they both have a c squared, right? Do we want to take out a positive c squared or a negative c squared?
Positive C. Negative C squared. Positive squared. But if you have positive B, it won't match your other parentheses. One C squared will match.
That's right. But remember, we really want to try to make our things positive. We do. But here, I have to leave it as a negative c squared. So my negative b and my positive 2 will match. But we're going to address that in a minute. So let's go ahead and make this a positive c squared. So that's going to be a negative b plus 2. And we've got to clean this up a little bit. Our parentheses match, y'all. It's just the b and the 2 are in the wrong spot. They totally match. Same sign, everything. So here's what we've got. A squared plus c squared. And then we've got 2 minus b. I cannot give you full credit if you turn it in like that. And here is why. That negative b, you can make, if you just ignore, just pretend that's not here for a second. Don't look at that. If you just focus on this, you can factor something out to make that b positive. What can you factor out? Yeah, y'all gotta factor that out when you can. And we can here, we have to, if we want full credit. So when I factor out a negative 1, that b is gonna change to positive. That 2 is gonna change to negative. That's what we're gonna have to do, y'all. So to write this in perfect factored form, this comes first, just like a plain GCF always comes first. And I'm not even writing the number 1. I'm just writing a leading negative. So it's going to be negative a squared minus c, or I'm sorry, plus c squared. Then we're going to write b minus 2. Okay, so there's only one more. There's only one more I want to do. Do y'all want to get anything out of all of them? No, yeah, you guys are right. Okay, well then let's take 4a out. So that's going to be u plus 6v. Okay. You guys are right. Keep going. What can you take out of the last one? Negative 5b, yes. And then that's going to be a positive u plus 6v. Very good. So if you notice, we had 4a minus 5b, and then u plus 6v. All right, so if you notice, you got a negative letter, right? But y'all, if I factored out a negative 1, what would happen to the first term? Right, so don't even waste your time. That's done. We're going to box that in and move on. So remember, if it looks like this, I don't know. We'll just make this x plus y, whatever. You don't even try to mess with the negative 4a. You're stuck with it being negative. But if it looked like this, then you need to fix that. Notice how the two are different. There's nothing I could do here. That's in complete factored form. But here, this is not factored.